We have today on UWITV, we have the Acting Secretary General and CEO of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, Mr. Neil Walters. Needless to say, this is probably the biggest blow ever, well, certainly in our lifetimes, of Caribbean tourism, where so many of our source markets have shut down, so many of our destinations are shutting down or have shut down. And so it has a tremendous effect on tourism, which is necessarily a personal service business. So, needless to say, when people start talking about social distance, things start talking about shelter in place. You can talk about some people working remotely, but certainly there's no such thing as a core part of our business ever working remotely. So, I really want to begin with Neil Walters, the acting Secretary General of CTO. And Neil, I believe we had a great pleasure last year of having the best year ever Caribbean tourism in terms of numbers.
Mhm.
And now we find ourselves in a completely different situation. Can you describe for us a little bit of where we are at the moment?
And thank you for this opportunity. First, let me say before I start to say anything that the Caribbean Tourism Organization's priority is the safety and health of the Caribbean, people of the Caribbean, and visitors. So, taking what Vincent said into consideration and everything, um, we have seen the closure of countries' source markets. We've seen the closure of the ports in of our member countries. We've seen the limited airline schedules and the berth cruise. So I think it's safe to say, in the absence of um, information at this time, that the tourism is severely impacted by COVID-19. Our members, where we get our information in terms of arrivals and expenditure and so on from, have been not necessarily slower than usual in reporting to us. So we don't have a firm picture of those numbers, but clearly we can tell that tourism is being severely impacted by COVID-19 at this time. I think that's the fairest assessment that we can make.
What are we doing now to begin to address this issue? Because I think we assume, but don't often say, tourism is far and away the biggest economic sector of the Caribbean region. So we have to begin to talk about what are we going to do to address this situation from today forward. Some of your thoughts from CTO?
One of the things that we have been doing is making sure that whatever we communicate to our members um, is based on information we receive from CARFA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, because we recognize that, especially in an environment such as this one, we need to ensure that the messaging that comes out is a definite correlation between tourism and health. So that over the last few weeks, um, basically from when we first got wind of this outbreak, this virus, and the fact that it could come to have been very closely with that our, our members are the tourists and boards of tourism, if you want to call it that, in the Caribbean, are aware of as many, if not all, of the issues related to COVID-19. So that when decisions are made by those entities, they are made with a full knowledge of the impact it can have both on the visitor and on um, the citizens of the destinations the visitors are coming to. Even before it actually became a crisis for us, we actually anticipated the fact that there would be some level of crisis management needed, and we have held discussions, webinars with our members to ensure that we try to mitigate against those circumstances. Frank mentioned the fact that we're collaborating with the CHTA, CARFA, and also the Global Tourism Resilience Center. And that's an attempt to make sure that our collective stakeholders, some of their stakeholders are not ours, to ensure that everyone, we've done as much as we can to ensure everyone is sensitized to the effect of the virus. Um, and then what we did recently, and this kind of flows with what Dr. McClure was saying just now, is we actually have held a webinar with the Association of British Travel Agents. We have an arrangement with Euromonitor and Apple Leisure Group to try to sensitize our members as to how things are changing in the market. And that in itself, too, also is a form of bringing members' minds to fore on the idea of what happens next, what they can expect to happen in the immediate future, and then continuing those programs, help them to understand what they can look at more long term. And but the key thing that I think we are looking at here when you undercut everything is the fact that we're looking at trying to create a platform for collaboration among all tourism stakeholders, not just the public sector, not just the private sector, but recognizing that we all need to work together to ensure that we come out of this outbreak as successfully as possible, if they can use that word at this time. But that's really where our underlying focus is: the collaboration, all sectors involved in this process to make sure that we can help each other up once the outbreak not dissipates, but the effects are reduced.
Just talk a little bit about the lessons that we have from the past in terms of how we work together, private public sector, in order to begin to ensure that once we get the all clear, that we are in the forefront of taking up whatever um, spent up demand, demand that is there.
Well, yeah. Looking back to the previous crises, at the end of the day, what was essentially done was and I think the most current one, even though it's not necessarily a health crisis, was the hurricanes in 2017, which did not affect all of our member countries. But the fact is, the level of devastation was so significant, actually led to the Caribbean being overall as being pretty much pummeled by in 17. And that to me is the most current recent lesson, because one of the things that was done was both sets of parties, the public sector and the private sector, working together to ensure that it was very clear, one, which countries were impacted by those storms, and then the second part was to ensure that the world as a whole recognized that the Caribbean was open for business, um, even if it was in a reduced way. But once those countries that were affected came back on stream, a significant amount of work was done to help them come back up to their previous levels. In terms of previous health issues, similarly, that we have to ensure is that the Caribbean's reputation remains intact. Um, this particular crisis, being one of global proportions, means that just like H1N1 and SARS, means that to a large extent we import the standards and the results and the effects from other parts of the world that have been affected before. Um, what we have done is, in this particular case, especially, I think, being very careful to ensure that we promote to the outside world the steps that we're being taken to ensure that healthy. And in my view, once we pass this crisis, it is not going to be a case where we need to now prove to people that we've been paying attention to those standards, but to show people once again how we can push our heads back above water, and that will require a collaborative effort between the public sector and the private sector. Destinations on the whole, which in some cases do the marketing and promotion in the marketplace, will need to get together with the chain of hotels. We'll need to get together with their smaller individual hotels to be able to once again show how to come our shores and be as comfortable as possible. One thing that is certain, though, I think, is that we will, of necessity, more than likely, given some of the economic changes that are expected to occur, likely see some changes in focus and in who needs to travel. And I think that also is something not preempting any other discussion, we need to look, we need to pay attention to um, who we will now be marketing to in the future, um, and how we will be doing it. It's a case where everybody will be pretty much thrown back into the mix, and the gains and the positives that we have had as the Caribbean may not necessarily exist anymore. But we have to work together to ensure that we can recapture that market share that we had before. The Caribbean is going from a position where we had a market share. And the funny thing is that everyone had a market share. And essentially now we're in a case where there's really no market share. We are going to have to find really creative ways to ensure that we can step ahead of the rest of the game, if I can call it that. And our natural resources and the things that make the Caribbean good and great are the things that we are going to have to highlight. And we're going to have to basically be able to sell the beauty essentially of the Caribbean, the things in the Caribbean that will differentiate us, to Frank's point, from everybody else around the world as quickly as possible and as clear a way as possible, so that we ensure that that market share we had before, we can even regain some of it, in the face of others who will be doing exactly the same thing. Once we come out of this crisis, there will be very, very little time to waste, if any.
Is there any reason to believe that the image of the Caribbean in any way, shape, or form is going to take a hit from this? Or
I think that actually we have done a lot of stuff that can actually assist mitigating that process by ensuring, as we mentioned, both of us before, the fact that we have been, ensuring that certain standards are being maintained when it comes to health and so on, so that during the period of this crisis, our track record was sure that there was no cavalier attempts or any kind of actions that stepped out of what have become pretty much international standards for dealing with this crisis. You need to be able to show them that you're following the game plan that larger countries are following, the World Health Organization, the CDC, and so on, and that you've taken the necessary measures to ensure that health safety. Um, so that once this ends and we keep following those guidelines, we keep ensuring that things are being done to show that we are a responsible destination, the Caribbean. And unfortunately, to date, pretty much all of our destinations are following effectively a similar game plan. I think that if there is any kind of effect on us, it might actually, it would likely not be negative. It would be a case where the Caribbean will be seen as a responsible destination at the end of the day.
the Caribbean is going to come out of this looking even better for a very peculiar reason. I mean, I am very much surprised at a region that is the most tourism dependent region in the world, that many of our countries were ahead of many of the other countries in the world and ahead of some of the other states in the world in doing the right kinds of things. So I'm really very proud of the region in terms of focusing on doing the right thing despite knowing that this was going to take an enormous hit on certainly our economies. I mean, two things I see happening. One is there are areas of our economy that rely very heavily on the cruise business. I mean, one of the things that we used to talk about is really the average spend, where the average spend really is almost meaningless, is what's the total spend is and who is getting that spend in terms of what it is. I mean, stockbrokers make a pittance on each stock trade, but if you do a million of them, you get a lot of income. So the idea, I think, is really beginning to understand that segment also, but also a great deal more. But also at the same time, I think you're going to find the cruise industry coming back that is much more integrated into the land and the destinations that they're calling on, as a result of what has happened to show that they're part of the Caribbean community, which is a hugely important part of their total business. So, Neil, any thoughts on that particular?
Even if the cruise lines did not see it before, and I mean, I'm speaking about this in against the context of some cruise lines being members of the CTO, um, is the fact that when I mean, and I'm going to use that example, when the cruise lines were birthed, as they have been in some countries, it was necessary for the persons on those cruise ships to transition to hotels until they could be airlifted out, or whatever the case may be. I think that things like that, the necessity that this crisis has brought on, will show all the different sectors of the industry, all the different players in this in, in this industry, the fact that we all work to ensure is built up as strong as possible. At the end of the day, though, I think we have to be mindful that our new tourism product needs to be looked at holistically, and looked at from the point of view of all the players, right down to the taxi men, right down to the attractions, and so on and so forth. Because, yes, I mean, I'm going to step away from the cruise lines for a minute. We need to look at the fact that all of these persons, all of these groups that we don't necessarily look at on an ongoing basis, have been significantly impacted. And whereas one group or another group might be able to be more resilient in this crisis, and come out of it, it's a case where we need to look at it so that all groups in the future, all the different sections, the persons contributing to the industry, can be able to ride out something like this without too much of a negative. So I think, yes, I agree. There is the opportunity for crews to be more properly integrated, but I'm going to take it a step further and say I think there's an opportunity for all the different areas to be better integrated, and to be more properly looked at as where they fit in and how they impact, and so on and so forth.
Where do we go from here? What is it that we need to do on behalf of the industry and the people in the region to make sure we are delivering the very best outcome once the all clear is given? What are some of your thoughts? Certainly, Neil.
Well, I mean, I think we've spoken about some of it already in terms of retraining staff. I think something that we didn't really look at before was probably looking at new business strategies, and incorporated in there will be new marketing strategies, because there is the potential at the end of this for who we market to change as well. I mean, we really don't know what is going to be the case down the line, after this is the end of this year. But at least look at retraining staff, looking at new business strategies. And if it is possible, and I mean, because I know at this point in time, funds are going to be very limited. If it is possible, and give, based on the nature of the entity, even look at renewing plant, because something that was discussed for a long time in the Caribbean was the fact that the plant needs to be renewed. And this is a prime opportunity now, if people can afford to do it, to look at something like that, to come out with a new look, almost a new lease on life. But all of these things, I think, need to be done, sorry, in the context of sustainability. Tourism for the longest time has been, for a lot of our countries, and in some cases the only source of revenue. I mean, all things considered, um, this is a case now where countries have actually lost pretty much all of that revenue, so that you have people in countries who will be essentially saying, well, we have nothing without tourism. We need to ensure that we can put ourselves right back up, so that, again, as was discussed before, once these issues end, the COVID-19 outbreak, we need to ensure that we are there, ready to act, ready to start, ready to restart business, in as holistic a way as possible. Um, and at the end of the day, it's a case where we've kind of skirted around it, and we haven't actually touched it, as but we really do need to ensure that the maximum benefit is being received by by pretty much all involved in tourism. Um, so that at the end, while I agree, and it's going to be a tough time going forward, I think we can look at ways by looking at more community tourism, things like that, that we can ensure that a better slice of the pie, for lack of a better way to put it, is shared among all of our Caribbean nationals. Um, some people now have been barely making eking out an existence, but it might be it's necessary for us to look at helping people, as Frank went on to say, build capacity to ensure that they have a level of savings, to ensure that they have that safety net built up. If people are barely making it, they will not be able to do that. So I think we need to widen that net to allow people to make the most benefit out of tourism, not just for, let's say, the big players, but for all of our citizens. Because at the end of the day, without tourism, there's really nothing that we can ramp back up to once this crisis is done. We need to find a way to do it in a much more holistic fashion.
I know that there have been a number of programs, and you may want to talk about a couple in particular from CTO that really have been doing a wonderful job of beginning to train a number of people. So you may want to talk about some of that and where people can find the information.
One of the things that I know our human resources department was looking at ramping that back up, even in this kind of environment, is we've had a couple. We have a sorry, we have a certification program, hospitality assured, which even though some of the businesses are closed, we're still looking at ones that are open to see if we can get them brought closer to being certified during this period, as long as they can, as long as they're open, or even can facilitate the certification process. In addition to that, what we're doing in the background is, and I mean, maybe this is not necessarily, well, I'll say it. The fact is, we're looking as well long term at things that could actually affect the Caribbean even past this crisis, so that we are still continuing development of an online program in terms of looking at a sustainable tourism for the Caribbean, which would obviously have to have in some tweaks now given this particular crisis, but also incorporated in that online platform is like a disaster mitigation um, 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 course or component as well. Again, this action we're going through now, this crisis will actually be need to tweak some of that information to incorporate it. Um, at the end of the day, the CTO continues to provide where possible, because a lot of our stuff was face to face, but I know we will have to adjust it in terms of making sure that our members, where possible, can still access it. There will be a level of um, training coming up very shortly in terms of accessing our relationship with Euromonitor, where which is actually an agency out of Europe, in terms of us looking at statistical information, etc., that our members can actually use during this period to see when that part of the world, and they also cover U.S. and Canada, actually, I should say, are actually how they're changing in this crisis. So there are a number of things that we're doing. Again, like Frank, some of these things may not necessarily be on our website, onecaribbean.org, but we are going through a process of ensuring that all of these things, plus any additional things that I've not mentioned, are available, any resources for our members to access. Um, we also continue to post the information from the Caribbean Public Health Agency, which is still very critical at this point in time. And all those things will also be are if what they're already available on our website, but they'll continue to be. And going forward, we're going to try to focus that information in a way that's a lot more easily accessible by the public.
Any final thoughts?
Yes, I want to say for our members after the 2017 hurricanes, when the statement was we need to build back better. I think that after this COVID-19 experience, we need to come back better. And I think like that's been shared by all of my colleagues on the panel. The Caribbean does stand in a position to come back stronger, and we are at a very pivotal point in our history where we can really show the world the resilience of the Caribbean and the Caribbean brand, and be ready for business once COVID-19 has passed.